Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this, the third in a series of 4 CPD sessions that I have brought about with CMC for November 2020. This series follows an earlier CPD series in July this year, and they are all based on a survey that CMC did of the contemporary music community, and these CPD sessions are all designed to meet their needs as expressed by them in light of changed circumstances due to COVID-19. This CMC session is in relation to Sibelius, which will be presented by Anselm McDonnell, and Dorico, which will be presented by Lillie Harris. Notation software is a vital tool for professionals involved in the field of new music. It has, however, some limitations, and that can be frustrating when people are trying to typeset ideas in contemporary notation. So Anselm and Lillie both have vast experience in this area, and they will be sharing their experience with all of us. The Anselm has experience in finding engraving solutions to a variety of notational problems in Sibelius, and he will give a brief overview of notation software options available. Anselm is a composer and guitarist based in Belfast. He has a diverse range of interests, and these have led him to create work in collaboration with lighting designers, theologians, poets, filmmakers, improvising musicians, and actors. And I'm reminded when I see that list that maybe we'll see the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker at some stage collaborating with Anselm. Anselm holds a doctorate in composition from Queen's University Belfast, where he was supervised by Professor Piers Hellawell. Composer Lillie Harris will give an introduction to Dorico software, which both Anselm and she uses as composers. This introduction should be of interest both to people who are already using Dorico and those who would like to explore what it has to offer. Lillie is a composer, copyist, and technical writer. She studied composition with Harris Kittos at the Royal College of Music in London, and since graduating in 2016, she has been working as a freelance composer and a copyist, as well as writing the user manual for the Dorico notation software. After they both give their presentations, we will host a question and answer sessions. You were all encouraged to email specific situations, challenges, and questions in relation to Sibelius and/or Dorico in advance of this session, but you're also invited to raise any questions that may occur to you during their presentations, and I will field those questions in a question and answer session. Thank you all very much, and now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Anselm McDonnell, who will talk about contemporary notation in Sibelius. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Could I just get a couple of thumbs up to check that everyone can hear me okay? Is that all loud enough for everybody? Great, thank you. Well, I'll dive into showing my screen now. Okay, so as Linda said, my background is as a composer and performer, and that is the context with which I'm coming to a session like today. So I don't work for a publishing company or anything. I come at this from the perspective of a practitioner who over the years has had to push the boundaries of my knowledge to be able to achieve the results that I want in notation software. As Linda mentioned, I write quite a lot of diverse music, so I'm demanding a lot of things from a notation software, whether I'm trying to make a completely graphic score or I'm designing a full orchestral score, which is going to be read by orchestral musicians who are familiar with Western classical music idioms. Some of you will know that this is the second seminar on contemporary notation in Sibelius, and I wanted to try avoid completely repeating myself. So I thought I'd just remind you of what has happened in the first session, and it's available on YouTube in a video. It's on my page and CMC's as well. So we'll be diving into some of these topics a little bit today, but if any of these are particularly of interest to you, you'll be able to find them on YouTube. So firstly, we went over an overview of the ribbons and of the ribbon, which is the long strip at the top of Sibelius, which is where you find most of the menus and most of the things that you need to interact with. So I give an overview of some of the different buttons that you can find there, the most useful ones, and how I might use them to go about solving a problem in Sibelius. Secondly, then I describe my process for problem solving in Sibelius, and if I've got a particular notation that I'm trying to get, how I go about breaking that down and working out the constituent elements of it and how to find those in the software. And we then demonstrated that by dealing with 5 notation problems. So firstly, with trill notation, where we had to make trill symbols with sharps included that were attached to the trill sign. We dealt with some harmonic notation, polymetrical music, where the music is in multiple meters at once, maybe 6/8 and 3/4 and so on. Then we had custom note heads, which I'll be touching again on today, and aleatoric box notation. And we finished off with talking about workflow efficiency. So if any of those topics are of a great interest to you, we'll maybe touch on some of these things today, but we'll be going over a couple of different things, so you can go back over and see that previous session. So today's overview, I thought that it would be good to really take a bit of a deeper dive into some of the menus in Sibelius that I kind of flew by the last time. And these are the menus that I find the most useful whenever I'm typing up something in Sibelius, especially if I'm trying to customize anything. These are the menus with which you'll need to be the most familiar. Now, what I'll be showing today is how to use these to get some more kind of extreme and customizable results. But if Sibelius isn't that familiar with you, don't worry, because understanding how these menus work will help your understanding of the software greatly. You'll then know how to find some of the other things that you're looking for. But if you're looking for a more advanced understanding of Sibelius, this will help you know where to look and where to make those changes within the software. So we'll start off by talking about the symbols and note heads menu. Then we'll deal with lines and text styles. Finally, I've tagged on in the end cross staff notation and percussion layouts. This was something that came up in the last seminar, but I didn't have time to deal with. If we have some time at the end, I'll give some general layout tips, and then we'll have an introduction to Dorico with Lillie Harris, which I'm very excited about, and then our Q&A session at the end. And at the Q&A session, we have a question about writing polytempo music, music that is in multiple tempi at the same time in Sibelius and Dorico, and we'll see whether that's possible and some approaches that can be taken. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is actually a topic that's kind of in the background of Sibelius, and that is how the software is actually thinking about putting the music down on the page. And I think it's important to understand this to know what you're doing when you're changing elements in Sibelius. So I've got this little diagram here, and if you'll forgive the rather cheesy analogy, I've called this the life of a character in Sibelius. So this is our flat, this is our character, Little Miss Flat. Okay, and this is where she lives. Okay, now all of the elements in Sibelius are either lines or they're characters. They belong to a font style, kind of like in Microsoft Word or any other word processing program. So this symbol here, this, sorry, I should call it a character, that's the correct term. This character belongs to a music font. And the music font it belongs to, its home, is Common Symbols for this particular one. So Common Symbols is a music font in Sibelius that contains elements like your flat, your sharp, your treble clef, your bass clef. And the way Sibelius thinks about these is these are objects that Sibelius is drawing on and using everywhere in your score that uses this character. So when Little Miss Sharp goes off to work, she works in symbols, okay? And we find the flat in the symbols menu under accidentals, okay? From there, she has several functions, okay? The first is the primary function, and that's where the object is in the score. So obviously, if you're using flats in your score and they're appearing as accidentals next to your note heads, that's the primary function of it. But the flat also has other roles in your score. It might be as a standalone symbol, something that you've put in that isn't attached to anything and you've just moved it around for your own purposes. It might be as part of a composite symbol, and I'll explain what we mean by that in a moment. Obviously, it can be part of a key signature. So when you're putting in a key signature in Sibelius, it's made up of several elements. It's made up of your treble clef, which is one character, and then maybe several flats, and that's one separate character. So Sibelius is drawing on those two things, putting them together to make a key signature, and then putting it into your score. You can, if you want, make a flat a clef. You can make it part of a line, and you can make it a note head. Now, probably you wouldn't be doing these, but that's just so you know, anything that you can find in the music font can kind of be put down here and made to fill one of these roles, which is one of the things that we'll be doing today. So this is helpful to just understand what is happening if we change any of these elements. So for example, if I change something to do with my music font, common symbols, something to do with this flat, that will affect the symbols menu where the flat appears. It will then affect the primary function of the object in the score. So all my flats will appear different depending on what I've done. It will also affect it in all of its other roles in the score. So for example, if we were to take the music font of common symbols and make it 50% smaller, all of the flats that appeared in your symbols menu would be 50% smaller. All of the flats in your score would be 50% smaller. And then any flats that are appearing in anything like a key signature, a composite symbol, maybe a trill with a flat sign, they're all going to be 50% smaller. So this is the most drastic change that we can do, is changing something to do with the music font back here. And sometimes we have to do that to get the solution we want. So that's just to explain how those characters are appearing in your score. And we'll deal with that in a moment. So we'll start off today with the symbols menu, okay? Because that's the first place that any of these characters are going to show up. The symbol menu is found under notations in the ribbon up here, this notations tab. Now this is a little small, so I'm going to, hopefully you can see this. I'm going to zoom this in for you. Here's my notations tab, okay? And here's the symbols menu. So as I said, the symbols menu is drawing on the characters from music fonts, and then from the symbols menu, they're being sent out to the other places where they're working. So for example, the flat sign is located in here, but maybe it's being used in a line. So it's being brought over to here and it's part of a line. So if we change anything further down the chain, that will affect all of these things. Now, just to mention that the reason we're going to talk a lot about characters today, and we talked a lot about graphics in the last session, is that graphics function differently in Sibelius to characters. This here is a graphic, okay? And you'll notice I can move it around quite freely. A character functions differently in Sibelius. It might be attached to a note, it might be attached to a key signature, it might be a clef or so on. It will be attached to a position that it can't be moved from. So the advantage of using characters over graphics is that when you export from your score into parts or so on, things won't move around. If you've created a score where there's lots of graphic elements, they are attached to the stave, but they will do a lot of moving around, and they won't be resized properly if you're doing things like changing staff size or so on. Whereas anything that is a character and is attached to a note or a rest in the score will be changed, and that makes them really useful to use. So this here is a graphic, but these here are all symbols, and they're functioning differently from graphics, and they're easier to use. So if you're approaching something in Sibelius and you need to come up with a solution, the first port of call should be to think, am I able to create this with symbols, with characters, rather than a graphic? We can use a graphic. I showed you some scores last time which are using graphics and quite extreme elements, very large pictures and so on. But if we want things to not move around all over our page, then we want to try use a symbol. So up here, let's dive into the symbols menu, which is this little arrow here. edit symbols. Okay, now when I click on it, it brings up this quite daunting looking menu. And the reason it's quite daunting is because this, as I said, this is where we're finding all the symbols that are being used in Sibelius. Okay. Now, at the most basic level, we can use a symbol in the score by just putting it in, and it's just a standalone object. So if I press the key command Z, that brings up the symbols menu. I can click on a symbol, it loads my mouse with the symbol, and then I insert it on the score where I want. Now it's attached to that rest, okay? I can move it around and attach it to something else if I want. But there's many times that we'll need to use symbols in a different way to that. So let's go back to the symbols menu here where we find everything. You notice these buttons down here, just to explain what these do. If you click on edit, you will start editing the symbol that you have clicked on in this menu. So for example, let's use our flat again as an example. Okay, there's our flat symbol under accidentals. I click on the flat, and then if I click edit, I will start changing. We'll talk about this menu in a moment. I'll start changing the symbol of the flat, okay? Now, remember, from the symbols menu, this is affecting everything else. So if I change the flat here, if I edit it and do something to it, that's going to affect everywhere the flat appears in the score, everywhere this symbol appears. So you want to be quite intentional if you're going to be changing something about one of these symbols. Another thing you can do is the next button here is new, and this creates a new symbol for you, which will appear right down at the bottom under user defined symbols. Okay, and then obviously we can delete some symbols. You can't delete any of the symbols that Sibelius already has loaded, but you can delete symbols that you've created. So here under user defined, these are symbols I've made, and I can delete them if I was to choose so. Music fonts, you don't really need to use. We'll be talking about it a little bit later, but as I said, remember our diagram. Music fonts is where the character is stored. So if I click on music fonts, this gives me another menu. And remember, our flat was found in common symbols. There's the music font, common symbols. So if I edited anything to do with that, it would then affect the way my flat appears here, which would then go further out into Sibelius and affect the way it's appearing elsewhere. Let's talk a little bit about making some of our own symbols then, because we often need to do this if we're trying to come up with a notation which we've maybe handwritten, and then we're trying to put that into Sibelius. So I click on a blank space, or I can just click new. If I click on a blank space and hit edit, it brings up this menu for me. Okay, so I want to give my symbol a name, obviously. You can then choose whether it is attached to the staff or the system, and whether it appears on all staves. This is useful. Mostly I attach symbols to the staff, but this is useful. Say you've got a string quartet and you're actually creating a symbol which is indicating something for the whole ensemble, and you want it to appear in their parts, then you would make it as a system symbol, because that means when you export it to your parts, they will all have it. If you make it a staff symbol and attach it to the first violin, it will look in the score like it's going to come out in all the parts, but you'll have to copy it and re-put it into each part. So depending on what you're wanting to do, depends on what you hit here. Under here are the elements which are going to make up our symbol. Now, if I click on graphic and import, which I'm not actually going to do at the moment, I'm using Mac OS Catalina and Sibelius 7.5, and they really don't merge well together. So if I click on this, the whole thing will crash. That's why I had to make some of these separately and then bring them over to this computer. So that's what I've done to create this here. This is a graphic symbol which I've imported in earlier, kind of like, you know, Blue Peter. Here's one I made earlier. So if I scroll down here and click on this symbol and click edit, you can see that graphic is selected. That's where I got it from. When you click on import, it will bring up like the finder for your computer. You can find what you want to put in, click on it, and it will appear in this box here. the type of graphics that Sibelius can take. It can take most graphics. SVG files, that's standard vector graphic. A vector means that all the lines are really smooth and it's not built of pixels. So if I would advise always using vectors if possible, because when I zoom in, the edges for these symbols are all really clean and they will look really nice when printed. Whereas if you make something in Microsoft Paint, which I used to do, and then put it in as a graphic, or put it in as a JPEG, when you zoom in, it'll look a bit fuzzy around the edges. So if you want a really crisp look to your score, I would use vector graphics. Okay, let's go back to our symbols menu and back to creating a new symbol. Okay, so that's how we put a graphic in. You can also use all the characters that Sibelius has already in it to create a new symbol. So if we click on character, under music fonts, okay, these are the different fonts where characters are stored. So you remember we saw that the flat belonged to common symbols, okay? So if we scroll down, there's our flat there and we can add it into this position. There's 255 boxes here. That's just to give space for all the characters, but not all of the fonts have 255 characters. So you'll notice you'll need to do kind of a bit of scrolling around depending on what you've selected. To find out which, obviously you could spend a lot of time kind of searching for a particular symbol. If you want to find out what font it belongs to, click on the symbol and click edit, and it will tell you where it's found. So this arrow is found under special symbols extra. So if I want to use it in my new symbol, I go to here, special symbols extra, scroll down, and it should be somewhere. I can't actually find it. It might be, well, oh no, that's because I clicked on the wrong one. That's why. There we go. There's our arrow there. Okay, so that's what's happening over here. We're choosing the elements that will then appear here. Now this box allows us to alter the position of the character that we've put in. So you can move it up and down and so on. And you can enter, if you want to do, things quicker, you can enter here. And you can also enter negative values, and that's to get it to move down or to move over to the left. This here shows where it will be centered, so where it will be positioned in relation to the note that you're placing your symbol next to. These two little boxes here, these only relate to if you're using a graphic. So if you have a graphic, you can tilt it by changing the degrees, and you can also scale it up or down and make it bigger or smaller. But you can only do that with a graphic. You can't do that with any of the characters already loaded into Sibelius because they're a particular size. They're just objects that are being put in. Now, a composite symbol, which I mentioned earlier, is a symbol made up of several different characters or characters and graphics. Okay, so we can add to what our symbol is down here. So if I click add, it will bring me back to my symbols menu. I can then click on another symbol, add it, and now I have two symbols. Or I have two characters in this menu. But when I make it as a symbol, let's call it arrow and whistle, it will be one symbol in Sibelius. So when I insert it into a score, there, they will move together, they'll be attached, and that's really handy. Okay, so let's go back to editing it. So this can be very useful if you want to make anything that both elements need to be attached. So for example, let's say we wanted to make a clef, an unusual an unusual key signature. We will go to common symbols. We add in the treble clef. Okay, now we want several extra elements to go in there. So let's add a microtone to it. Okay, so let's add a quarter sharp. Okay, so here's our quarter sharp. We're going to move it across. Let's make it, let's try it 0.5. Okay, let's make it a C quarter sharp. Okay, and we could call this C quarter sharp clef. Not that we'd ever really need to use this, but just as an example. Okay, so these two things are now always attached to each other. You can do this with graphics as well. So I've done that here, for example. So you'll see down here, this is made up of 3 elements. There's the main symbol, which is the first little staccatissimo marking here. There's the graphic, which is the half diamond. And you'll see I can now turn it around if I so want. And then there's the staccatissimo below. So this is made up of 3 elements. So this is a very versatile menu, and you can use it to make most of the things that you would want to do. Okay. Now that's just making symbols independently to kind of put in the score and show whatever we want. But you can also use symbols to replace a symbol that already exists. You remember in our diagram, I closed it, that every object has a primary function in Sibelius. So for example, an accidental, a flat, will always be attached to these notes. It's not going to move around. So if I wanted to create a symbol that worked in the same way, then what I would do is replace that symbol in the symbols menu. So for example, and this is probably the most likely option that you would use, let's say that I decide that I don't want this symbol for my quarter sharp, but I would rather have a different quarter sharp symbol. So I click on the symbol, I go down to edit, okay, and I'm going to replace this. Let's see, Sibelius does have a load of other accidentals. Let me see. You will find that you spend a lot of time kind of looking through this menu to find what you're looking for. Well, I'll give up for the moment, but let's say that this is the symbol that I want to replace it with. All I need to do is click OK. And now you'll see that the quarter sharp has become this in my menu. And what that means is that if I go to a note and I go to my keypad and I change this to a quarter sharp, this won't change the appearance of it. Can I make the keypad larger? No, I don't think so. This won't change the appearance of it in the keypad, but if I click on it, it will now be this symbol and it will move around with my note. Okay, it'll always be attached like that. It's functioning as an accidental. So I've taken something that I wasn't using in the main score and I've replaced it with something else. Now, this can be quite useful if we want to, for example, create custom stems. So let's say you were trying to create a Sprechstimme for Schoenberg's singing style in scores like Piero Lunaire. You might try to take a cross symbol and just put it in constantly and very, very carefully position it over the stem of each note. But for a start, that's going to be extremely time consuming. And if you start moving things around, it's going to fly all over the place. So it would be much better if we could instead make it so that it's attached to the stem itself. Now, the only way to do this is to replace the primary function of something else in Sibelius that works in that way. So there are 2 elements in Sibelius that attach themselves to the stem. The first is the buzz roll symbol, which you can find here in the keypad. And the second, obviously, is the tremolo marking, because that's taking place on the stems. So what I've done here, if I click on these notes, you'll see that the buzz roll is actually selected. And that's because in the symbols, under buzz roll, which I think is under percussion. No. What did I replace it with, an X? Oh, there it is. Okay. You'll see that when I click on that, it actually says buzz roll. So under percussion, this would normally be a little Z, but I have gone in, I have edited it, I have put in a little cross instead. And now, whenever I put a buzz roll into my score, I get that little X attached to the stem. So you'll see when I move it around, the X stays where it should be, which is super handy. It's not going to go walkabout. I've done the same thing over here, which is I've changed the tremolo. Now, the tricky thing about changing the tremolo is if you change the tremolo symbol, it will also change it for these other tremolos, because Sibelius is using the same symbol for each tremolo. So if I put 2 tremolos on it, you'll see I start getting this slightly ridiculous looking kind of set of beads here. The tremolo symbol, I think is found. Did I write it down? Notes. It's under notes. Okay, there we go. There it is there. Okay, that's the symbol for a single tremolo slash. So again, I went into it, I edited it, and I used this, which was, this is a character. You can use a graphic if you want as well. So this system is very flexible. The other way to do it, now obviously there's only 2 things in Sibelius that will sit on the stems like that. So the other way to do it is actually to make note heads, which can be moved across onto the stem. Now I'll come back and talk about that in just a moment, because I'll talk about articulations first, and then we'll get onto note heads. So articulations is the same thing. Under our keypad, on our keypad, sorry, under articulations, we can replace any of these if we want. Now remember, it changes them system-wide, so you want to change things that you're maybe not using elsewhere in the score. So that's why the buzz roll solution is quite handy, because if you're not using the buzz roll, you can just use it to make this, whereas you're more likely to be using the tremolo, so this isn't a great solution. But let's say that I wanted to create Bartok pits that are attached to the notes rather than just floating above them as a symbol, which is kind of, you know, what we might normally do. And then they'll kind of move all over the place. So I decide what am I using in the score that works as an articulation that I can replace. And for this, I've decided to use the up bow and the down bow. So if you're not writing something for strings, those could be useful ones to use. So again, click on symbols, go down to articulation, okay? And you can edit, you'll see here, Sibelius actually thinks this is an up bow. I've edited it and I've replaced it with the Bartok pits symbol. So now anytime I want to make a Bartok pits, I can just click on this and it will make Bartok pits as articulations for me. Quite handily, Sibelius also comes with 3 possibilities for making a custom articulation if you're using lots of articulations and you don't want to replace anything in your score. And again, those are found under articulations. Now, when you bring up the articulations menu, this first box will be blank, as will this one and this one. So if I drag this over here, this first box relates to that on the keypad, this second box to this one, and this final box to this. So if I edit this blank space here and put in something as an articulation, just for the sake of argument, let's make it this. Okay, then when I click on this note and click my custom articulation, it won't come up in the keypad. You'll just have to remember what you've assigned to it. Then voila, it will place my custom articulation over the top of the note. just to explain what's going on with the way this is laid out, from left to right, this is the order in which articulations will sit over the top of your note. So, for example, a staccato will always be below a staccatissimo, will always be below a wedge, and so on. So your first custom articulation will always be directly above the note and below the staccato, if you also have a staccato marking on it. Your second one will be further up, and your third one will be further up again. The second line is the same symbols, but underneath. That's what they appear like underneath. So for example, here, so this symbol is taken from here. That's what the symbol looks like above the note. And this is what it looks like from here if it's below the note. Now you'll see that with my custom one that I made, that this one is actually slightly off to the right. And if I click on this note and put in my custom articulation, it's not properly beneath the note. So the way I would change that is by going into the menu for that symbol, editing it, and it's not appearing at the moment. There we go. By moving it across to the left a little bit, and click OK. Oh, now it should be centered. There we go. It takes a moment to change it. So I've managed to reposition the articulation where it should be. So if there's any special kind of articulations that you're using to indicate something in the score, you can either replace something here that you're not using, or you can create 3 custom articulations which you can use instead. All right, now let's talk about note heads, and this is a very fun one, okay? So we've talked about the symbols menu. The note heads menu is next to it, to its right, okay? And we can edit note heads by clicking on this here. Firstly, if you want to do just something very straightforward and change what the note head is like, Sibelius has quite a lot of options already loaded in for you. So if you just click on this here, it gives you, I think, 32, no more, 30. Oh, I made these ones. It gives you 22 options preloaded for you to put in. Okay, so I just click on whatever I want, and it will make that note head into it. If you've already changed a note head and you tap on another note and then just hit that button, it will change it to whatever you previously selected. So if you've lots of crosses to enter in your score and you don't want to have to enter this menu each time, then you can just do that and so on. Okay, let's change these up.
Come on in.
No, I just wanted to see if my window was up.
All right.
All right, so in the edit note heads menu, this is what it looks like here. This gives us even more scope for creating something specific. So here are all the note head sets that Sibelius gives us. And then right at the bottom are extra ones that I made for this session. So similar to the symbols menu, we can either edit a note head set, we can create a new one, or we can delete one. Now, again, we can't delete any that Sibelius already has, but we can delete a custom one that I've made. Now, similar to how I talked about, if you change a music font, it will change kind of everything related to those symbols, so those characters in the rest of your score. If you change a note head, it will change all of those for the rest of the score. So if I change my basic note heads to something, and I'll explain this menu in a moment, then it will change it across the whole score. So if you're wanting something specific, my advice would be always create a new note head set. If you click on a note head set here and then click new, it will make a new note head set based on whatever this is. And you can then use that in addition to whatever you're using. This will kind of save you just accidentally hitting something and then all the normal note heads in your score suddenly look really weird. So let's make a new one based on the cross note head set. So firstly, I want to rename it. I'm going to make cross stemless note heads. Okay, so that's what I'm going to call it. We then have 5 tick boxes here that allow us to make various options. So play, If you don't want the note head to play back, when you hit the playback, you can tick that. That can be useful for if you're doing something like, let's say these are key clicks that you're using to, you're showing that it's key clicks on a clarinet, then you don't really want them playing back because you don't actually want to hear the pitches. So you click that. The transpose one, that just means the pitch of whatever it is will transpose if you've got transposing instruments in it. And if we take that off, it will change some of the other things as well. Generally, I just keep that on. It doesn't make that much of a difference. Accidental means that accidentals can appear next to it or not. So if you tick it off, none of your notes will have accidentals next to them. You can turn off the ledger lines as well, or have it with ledger lines. And then finally, this is the one that I actually want for this, to create a stemless cross note head, is I want to click off stem. So I don't want that selected. Now, when we get to this menu here, this is showing us the 4 different symbols that my note head set is based on. Okay, so remember we talked about the character is based in the music font. It's coming to the symbols menu, and then it's being sent out to the rest of Sibelius to do its work. So under symbols, okay, these note head sets are all taken from our symbols menu. So if you look in the symbols menu, you will find all of these symbols. So if you change them in the symbols menu, they will also change in their appearance here, okay? Now you can change the symbol for each of these values here, your crotchet value, your minim value, your semi-breve, and so on. Okay, so if I click on change symbol, I can change it to any symbol that I have loaded in the symbols menu. So if I wanted to change it to, for example, my graphic that I've already imported into the symbols menu, I can now use that from there, click on it, and voila, my crotchet is now going to be this symbol. Now remember, if I want to change the appearance of the symbol itself, I need to do that from the symbols menu. So let's say I wanted to turn this round so the white side of this diamond is on the right and the black side is on the left. I would need to go back into the symbols menu and edit the symbol itself to be able to do that. These values down here then, this is related to where the position of your note head symbol is sitting, okay? And this takes a lot of tweaking, but is very useful. So let's look at this example here, okay? This is a bit of a mess here. You can see for a start that when I changed my note heads, that none of them are actually connected to the stems. And then these ones are sitting directly on top of the stems, okay? And I don't want that, okay? Now, this was a note head set. Let's see, which one was it? I think that was the first one, okay? And then I made a second one called arrow diamond note heads fixed, okay? So if I change it to that, you'll see it moves across. And that's because under the note heads menu, I realized that this was happening. So I went and I fixed these values here. Okay, so my problem was that when the note head had a stem going up, it wasn't close enough to the stem. So I moved the note head slightly right and slightly up, and that brings it snugly into, well, not quite. I haven't put in quite the right values. It takes a bit of kind of going back and forth between that menu to find out. And then the same thing with these note heads here. I've had to shunt them across to the left to be able to fit in properly. Okay, let's go back down. Now, yeah, no, I didn't. Now you'll notice another problem. Oops, zoom out. Another problem with these note heads, and that is that they're slightly too big. They're kind of sitting on top of each other, which isn't great. And that's because the symbol that I put in was slightly too big. So you'll need to go back into symbols and make the note heads slightly smaller. So you'll see the way that this one is actually sitting outside the space of the stave. So I would want it slightly smaller so it fits snugly there. The other thing, and this is just a general thing if you're making your own custom note heads, try not to do what I've done here and have lots of things sort of sitting either side of your note heads, because you'll see here this is extremely difficult to read because they have all these bits sticking out of them and they're crossing over the top of other note heads. So that's making them a bit tricky to read. This down here, without the staccatissimo symbols on the side, is much easier to read. Now, there's another problem that happened when I was doing this, and that is with the ledger lines. Okay, you'll see that the ledger line here, you can only just see it out the left edge of this note head, and it doesn't appear out the right side of the note head. And that's especially problematic when we get several ledger lines like this. Now, I haven't been able to figure out a particularly good way to get around this. I would just say that if you're designing a custom note head, try to make it so that it is a similar size to the default note head, because the ledger lines are related to that. Unfortunately, you can't change the length of individual ledger lines in Sibelius. You can change the length of ledger lines across the whole score, but that's a really drastic option. And if you're doing that, if you're doing a combination of custom note heads and other note heads, then it will just look kind of crazy. That would be found under Engraving Rules, which is over here under the Appearance tab. So we go to Engraving Rules, Notes and Tremolos, and you can actually extend the ledger lines beyond the note head. So if I'm to enter something ridiculous like this, like 80, you'll see that my ledger lines expand out so they can now be seen. So they look much better for these note heads, but for any other note heads, they will look slightly comical, like these ones down here. Okay, so that's quite a dramatic option, and we don't really want to do that. Okay, I'm actually going to skip on. There's a few more things to talk about note heads, but I'm going to skip on to my next topic so we can get on to creating custom lines. Okay. So we've talked about the symbols menu, how that relates to the note heads menu. We can also use the symbols menu to create lines. So this is the lines menu here. When you click on edit lines, it brings up all the lines in Sibelius. Now, again, we have two options. You've got staff lines and you've got system lines. You want to use system lines if you are creating anything that is related to multiple parts on the score, such as measurements of seconds. Mostly it'll be anything time related. So you'll see here that these lines I've created, these are system lines. So they appear on each staff rather than just on the one staff. If you create a staff line, that's generally related to like a technique or something that you want to just relate to the one instrument. Okay, so under staff lines, if you want to edit something, we click on it. Now remember, again, these buttons down here, you can edit an existing line. Probably best not to do that because it changes them all. You can make a new line, which is what I would do. So whatever you have selected, you will make a new line based on that. And then you can delete any custom lines you've made, which are the ones that I have down here. Let's talk quickly through this menu. So I want to define a new line based on line. So it'll be very basic. And that brings up this menu here. I want to rename it to whatever I want. So I'm going to name this circles with line. Okay. This box here allows us to select what is going to happen to the line itself. Do we want it to be solid, to be dotted, to be dashed? We can have it wavy as well if we want. So I'm going to make this a dashed line because I'm going to use it to show a gradual change. Okay. So I create a dashed line. The width here corresponds to the width of the line itself. So if I change that, it makes it a lot thicker. I can also say how long the individual dashes are. So I can make these slightly smaller if I want, and I can change the gaps between them. If I click this button here, if I have a symbol at the start of the line, this will make sure that this line starts to the right of the symbol and not on top of the symbol. So I do want to have that selected. And then the other thing is this here, which is horizontal. Now, if I have this clicked, what that means is Sibelius will create a line that can't move upwards. So you'll only be able to make it a horizontal line. But if you have it off, you'll be able to drag the ends of it in different directions and make it tilt all over the place. And that could be really useful. Don't worry about this option here. This just means that it's making it, it's changing the resolution of it so that it looks really smooth for printing. So this is going to be a horizontal line. So let's take horizontal. Now in this menu on the left, I can change what is happening at the very start of my line. So I can put in text if I want. Okay, and that brings up this. I can type something at the start. And the text style is just what, that brings up this huge menu here, okay? But that's just going to define what kind of font the text is in when I put it on. Okay, so there's my text at the start. Now I actually want to select a symbol. Remember I said that the symbols were going to pop up for us again. So if I click select, it brings us back to the symbols menu again. Okay, so I'm going to put in a little circle here right at the start. Now you'll notice that it's maybe not positioned the best way that I would like. So what I'm going to have to do is move it around a little. And we have very handy parameters here to do that. So I'm going to move it slightly over to the left, minus 0.5. And I'm going to move it slightly down. Let's try 0.3. We can maybe make it a little better, but we'll leave it at that. Okay. Under here, we don't need to change any of this for this particular line, but if you give it a hook, that just adds a little line to like a vertical line to the start of your line. So if I put in 2, you'll see that changes that. So we now have a little line going up, -2. We now have one going down. So that's how you can make brackets. We can also put an arrow in, and you have various options for the type of arrow you want. But because I've got this symbol at the start, I don't want to do that. This box here is kind of what goes in the middle of your line. But that's when it says continuation, what that is doing is it means that the continuation symbol will appear when the line crosses into another system. Unfortunately, you can't make a line where there are 3 symbols, a symbol at the start, a symbol in the middle, and a symbol at the end. That would be really handy. And another limitation is we can't create a line with text at the end. We can only create a line with a symbol or one of these caps at the end. So you'll notice that this menu is quite similar to here. It does the same thing. It puts in something at the end, but it doesn't have the option for text, which is a real shame. So let's find another thing. Let's use this. Okay, and again, I might want to space it out a little better to put it in the right place for what I want. Let's make it 0.8. Okay. Okay, so there's my line created. Something else you should be aware of, which is a limitation of this menu. If you click on centered text, okay, that does put a text in the center of your line, but it deletes your symbol from the start of the line. So you can't have a symbol, text in the middle, and then a symbol at the end. And similarly, you can't have text at the start, text in the middle, and then a symbol at the end. Because if I put text at the start, and then I click on center text, these are related somehow, and it will drag my center text over here, which is a shame. Where's my, no, let's just use that for the moment. Okay, so let's click OK. Oh, it hasn't got rid of the text yet. We don't want text. There we go. So now I have a new line that appears for me. So if I hit the key shortcut L and I go down, it will be based in the same place that I based the line off. So I based it off this straight line here, so it appears here. Okay, and I can now add it in and move it around as a line. So this is really handy for creating anything where you want to create a gradation between one thing and another, for example, like this, because then rather than this being a symbol and then a line and then another symbol, they're all attached, so you can move them around at will, which is really handy. And you can also shorten them and so on. Okay, it would be great if you could add text to it as well, like here, if I could add that, but these are actually separate elements. If you want to create a line which has multiple symbols at the start, we can't do that. Okay, so if I go into lines and go down and edit this one, okay, this here at the start of my line is multiple symbols put together and created as one symbol. So again, I have to go back to my symbols menu, and we talked earlier about composite symbols, symbols that are made up of several elements. Here we go. There's my single symbol that is made out of 3 separate bits. Okay, and that's because the lines menu will only allow me to put one symbol at the start of the line. So I'm using this to indicate that the horn has to switch quickly between the hand mute and the open mute, or the hand mute and just open. So that is a single symbol that I've used. And then that was just another example there. Okay. Now you can create lines with continuous symbols. I'll have to kind of fly through this here because I've spent far too much time talking about the symbols. Lines with continuous symbols, you can create these. You can only do these in 2 ways. And the way you do this is under lines. If we go to edit a line, you'll see the styles. You can change them to wavy lines, wavy vibrato lines, or wide vibrato. Now, the reason these are different is because what I have done is I have actually changed the symbol for wide vibrato. Okay, so if I go into symbols, wide vibrato is found under guitar. Okay, that's there it is. That's normally, or yeah, so it's normally a bigger version of this, but I have replaced it with something else. And that means when I go into this line, let me see. This line is actually the style of wavy wide vibrato, but I've changed the vibrato symbol to a different symbol, and so now I'm able to get that. Now, the 2 that I would use to change it is change the arpeggio symbol and change the wide vibrato symbol. And those are the only 2 I would bother changing, because trills are much more common and vibrato, like just normal vibrato, is as well. So if you change those in symbols, remember that goes out system-wide. You've changed it the whole way around Sibelius, and it will change those. I changed these 2 because I don't tend to use the arpeggio symbol very much, and I don't tend to use the wide vibrato very much. But you'll notice that because I've changed the arpeggio symbol, if I go up to arpeggios, oh, maybe I didn't change the arpeggio symbol. If I had changed the arpeggio symbol, these would look really strange, and you would have to kind of reverse what you've done. Now let's talk briefly about text styles. Okay. And that is the only menu we're going to talk about today that isn't found under here in the ribbon, and it's found obviously under text. Okay. And this is the styles menu here, which you can click on. Now, just a few comments generally about text in Sibelius first. If you click on a text that you have and then go to edit styles, it will automatically select for you what text style that already is. So that's really handy if you want to find out what style you're using. Okay, so that one, I'm using plain text and so on. Now, some general advice on kind of selecting fonts. Under here, if you click on text styles, you can change the fonts for your whole score. And that's one way to kind of make your style look unique to you. I would avoid, it's kind of a design no-go to have lots of fonts on the single page or even in the same score. So I would actually go with the same font and then change, use the different variants. So this is the same font, but using italics, regular, and bold. And what I just personally tend to use them for, I use bold for instrument names, tempo markings, and rehearsal marks as well. I use italics for character and expression indications, bar numbers, tuplets, and then I use regular for any performance instructions or technique. That's enough of a difference that if you're consistent, the performers will be able to notice what differences you're making and quickly register whether something is a technique or an instrument name or so on. And then just in regard to fonts themselves, I'd avoid any fonts with lots of swirls and curls to them. They can look really nice as titles, but they're not very clear and they're not very legible in a score. So choose a no-nonsense, clear font. And if you want to use a fancy font, reserve that for the title page or for your name at the start. Okay, now, if we dive into the text styles menu, okay, there's lots of texts here, but they tell you, they kind of tell you what they are. So if we can edit them, we can create a new text style, and just ignore this one. These are the two we mainly want to concentrate on. So again, if you edit something, you're changing it system-wide. So if you want to create something specific, I would just go for new text style. You will create a new text style that's based on the original one. You can also edit the music fonts from here. So you can edit something like Common Symbols. So you'll see that I've made a version of Common Symbols called Common Symbols Small. And I can use that to then make symbols in my symbols menu and do things like create small clefs, small note heads if I want that are different to the Sibelius default small note heads. I can do things like change the flags on my notes and so on. So that's really helpful. So again, to find where a symbol is sourced from, click on Symbols, edit it, and it will tell you what font it is related to. So if I go up here, you can, creating music fonts to alter character sizes. If I make a line, now I told you I couldn't make a symbol in the middle of a line. This is actually a symbol that's the start of the line, but I use the lines menu to move it very far to the right and then up a little. And that's because this is a situation where you might want to show what the rhythmic value is, because harmonics, you can't see very clearly the difference between minims and crotchets. But this is slightly too big. I wanted this. This is the default symbol in Sibelius for the minim that I took from the symbols menu. So what I had to do was create a new music font, which had a slightly smaller font size, and then choose a crotchet out of that and put it into the line. So quite a laborious process, but it looks quite nice at the end. And that's the same thing I did for this over here. So when I originally created that circle symbol, oh, sorry, I was going to edit it for you, but I don't have time to do that. These were too small. So I went into music font, find where these were sourced from and made them bigger. And that can change that for you. So to do that, and I'll maybe finish with this and we'll move on to Lily's presentation, is under styles. Let's say I want to edit common symbols. I click create new text style. And let's call this Common Symbols Large. Now this brings up another complicated menu for us. Just need to become familiar with what these things kind of do. So you can change the basic font of it. Sibelius has 4 different music fonts which deal with which give it a different look, maybe like a jazz score or a big band score or so on. So you can change those there. I don't want to mess with that. I just want to make everything bigger. Okay, so I'm going to make it size 25, and I'm going to change it in the parts as well so that it will appear like that. These are all related to kind of things like the gap between your characters if you're typing text or so on. You can also change the angle, which is really handy, and you can go right the way around. You can't see it there, but So you can have things slanting down, slanting up. So if for some reason you wanted a treble clef that was slanting down, you can change the angle. You're more likely to want text that is maybe vertical, at which you change it to 90 degrees. And you can also change the text color. So now I have a text style called Common Symbols Large. And if I go back into notations and go to symbols, and I want to create a new symbol, so edit, this is now stored under my music fonts. So I can now find Common Symbols Large, and you'll see immediately those are a bit bigger. Okay, so there we now have a really large clef that we can use whatever way we want. Maybe we want to change the actual clefs. Where are they? So you could edit the actual clef. So rather than that symbol, let's go, let's add the one that we made. And we'll delete that. And there we're just left with our large one. And you can see that that's changed that in the score. Now that's an unlikely, obviously that's an unlikely situation, but there might be others where you can think of a way that that would apply to the effect you're trying to achieve. Under the text styles is also where you erase the border behind things. So explore these are handy, but this is where you can erase the background. So that's useful for if you've got a time signature and you want things crossing it, or sorry, you don't want things to collide when they cross over it. You can also put borders behind things and so on. So this over here, and just to finish, this over here is a line that I changed to make thicker. I changed to make a bracket out of. And then the centered text, I had to create a new text style which erased the background because otherwise the line would be going straight through this number. And then in my center text, I changed the center text to this text style so that there's now an erased background behind it. And then I did the same thing over here. Although this one I was changing the font size to make it larger. Okay, so that's how you would make a text which sits in the middle of your line, but the line doesn't cross through it. I'm sorry I've talked for longer than I should have, and we didn't even get to cross-staff notation, but we'll hand over to Lillie now to make sure that we kind of get through everything. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope it was helpful.
Thank you very much, Anselm. Lillie, if you want to now share the screen, and just to let everybody know that we will have questions and answers after this. And we've had, as Anselm said, a question about polytempo music already submitted, and any of you that have questions, we'll welcome them. Lillie's is a significantly shorter presentation because she's introducing Dorico, but we are really interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much, Lillie.
Thank you. Oh, firstly, thank you, Anselm. That was amazing. It's been, I'll confess, it's been quite a while since I used Sibelius in quite that much detail. So I feel like it was a good reminder for me. Can everybody see my screen here? You should see a blank Dorico project. There we go. Smashing. So this is going to be a really, really quick whistle-stop introduction to just a couple of things in Dorico that I think you might find helpful. Focusing on, as advised by Anselm, who told me some of his favourite things in Dorico, we're going to be looking at just getting notes and some notations into the music, how you do that, and then just sort of my favourite thing that I think might be of interest to you, which is using time signatures and sort of a Dorico overview default settings kind of approach to control things like beaming and beat divisions, because I think the way that works in Dorico is really elegant. So we're not going to go into too much detail about how Dorico works, but you can probably see there's 5 buttons in the top left here. We're in setup mode. This is the introduction space. What we're going to do just to get going is we're going to add an ensemble. And I've given myself a key command for this, which is Shift E, because it makes my life much easier. And then so that starts the page up, and we can now switch. Well, before we switch to right mode, I'll just quickly see you've got 5 players here. Dorico thinks in players rather than instruments. These are section players, which represent a string section, but you can have solo players, which represent like a flautist who might double on piccolo. So a solo player can hold lots of instruments, a section player holds one, but can divide. So that's that sort of philosophical distinction. We're going to switch to right mode. Right mode is where you right? Music, it's kind of self-explanatory. What you'll notice is we've started with staves for each instrument, but no time signature, no key signature. Dorico doesn't assume C major, it assumes atonal, but there's no key signature in here at the moment. You don't have to have, there's no minimum duration for what is called a flow. You can just have it as long or as short as you like, and you don't even have to have a time signature. So we're going to start inputting some notes on the first violin without inputting a time signature. And the way that you input notes in Dorico is using the caret. That's caret, not carrot, but it is orange. The caret is a really powerful tool, and that's kind of what I'm going to focus on in this little session. What it shows is where you're going to insert things, a bit like a cursor in Microsoft Word. It can shapeshift into different things. We're going to have a look at a couple of them. But what it basically does is show you that at this point in time, a note's going to go in. So if I start pressing keys on my keyboard, we'll get some notes, and you can tell how long they're going to be based on the symbol here in the notes panel. The moment they're crotchets, so I'm just going to put in a few of those. And then I think I might like some quavers, so I'm going to press 5 and switch to quavers. And then semiquavers. And as you'll see, I'm just going to escape note input. Because we don't have a time signature, it's all being treated as one bar, so they're all beaming together. But that's not necessarily what you want. So we're going to put this in 2/4. So, so I'm going to open the popover. Sorry. Dorico uses popovers to get notations in. You can also use the panel on the right of the window. You see these lists of notations here. They can open up things for clefs, key signatures, time signatures, tempo, etc. Dorico categorizes notations based on their musical purpose rather than necessarily what they look like. So under the dynamics tab, you'll see both hairpins and immediate dynamics. They'll go together as the same thing. But for ease of use, I would recommend using the popover because it's a key command and you can do it all at one time. So I'm going to press Shift M for the time signature popper, M for meter, and enter 2/4 and press return. And I get a time signature. And what Dorico does is automatically carve up subsequent music to fit the meter that it's put in. So Dorico stores information in a slightly different way to other notation softwares. It thinks in like sort of rhythmic time. So this note here, instead of being the first beat in bar 3, it's the 5th crotchet beat. So if I change the time signature, the bar lines move and everything gets rebeamed. Just undo that. But what I actually want to do now is change some of these notes. I'd like them all to be quavers. And what you can do here is using another tool is insert mode. I'm going to press I. Careful with this one, but it can be very powerful. Insert mode means nothing gets deleted if you make things longer or shorter. It squishes them together. So I've got insert mode on and I press 5 for quavers. And they're all quavers, which is pretty nice. But what I've decided I want to do is add some quavers in the bottom stuff as well. Nice. But I'd actually like to have a bit of polymetric stuff going on. So I'd like this top violin staff to be in what feel like it's in 6/8, but be notated alongside the violin too. Now, Dorico doesn't do metric modulation where the beats don't officially line up. So in Dorico, a crotchet is a crotchet across all staves, but you can use hidden tuplets to make it look right. What I'm going to do first is give the violin 1 a 6/8 time signature all on its own, which is Shift M for the time signature popover, 6/8. But then instead of pressing return, I'm going to press Alt return, and it has its own time signature. Now you can do this for every staff if you want, and they'll get their own time signature, but obviously crotchets all line up. So delete that. But what I want is for them to be in time with the bar line. So if I re-input a bar line here, which is Shift B for bar lines, and a pipe character, it re-inputs a bar line which has the implicit time signature of 2/4, as you can see by this signpost here. I'm going to turn the violin 1 into triplets by selecting them, pressing the colon key for the tuplets popover. Dorico is suggesting, I think you'd like them to be triplets. I'm going to say, yes, please. And there they are, all triplets. and they all fit in the bars alongside 2/4. And if I don't want to see them, open the properties panel at the bottom, which is going to be your best friend because you can do all sorts of stuff here. And I want to see no number. And things that are hidden in Dorico are indicated with signposts, which is a handy way to find them again if you want to find them later, but you don't have to see them. You can turn signposts off like so, if you don't want to see them. So that's pretty nifty. Now what I'm going to show you is a bit more of the carrot. I hide the properties panel. You don't have to specify notes that go over bar lines. You don't have to think about the tides at all. I'm going to select 8 for a whole note and input it, and Dorico automatically notates it as 2 tied minims if required. If I skip forward a crotchet beat and do the same thing again, it's tied across the bar line as required. If I want to input multiple notes at the same time, I turn the caret into chord input with Q, and you can see it's got this plus sign, and that means it doesn't advance when you input a note, it stays where it was, and you can build up notes from the bottom up, C, E, G, C. And then if you want to go below, because they go upwards, if you want to go below instead, you hold down Control and you put one in below. That's pretty handy. And then if I want to input some dynamics, I can use the popover, Shift D for dynamics, and I can input a whole dynamic phrase in one go. So if I say I want to start quietly, get louder, get too loud, get quieter, be quiet, it puts the whole thing across the phrase. But if, say, I wanted to input dynamics, oh no, automatic justification there as I remove the note. If I want to input a dynamic in the middle of this tie chain, as you can see, Dorico treats a tied note as a single note. But if I want to put a dynamic right here, I can't select anything to do that, but you can use the caret for that. So if I double click here, caret appears, and I can input a forte exactly there. And I can even, if I want to, say that's going to be a forte that continues, and I've got crotchet selected here, and I press space to advance the caret, and it extends the dynamic to exactly where I want it. I end it where I want it. And then if I want to split this note to signify where the FFF takes place, I just put the caret in there, and I press U to cut it, select this note, press O to stick its duration, tie it, and it's stuck. Now that's handling one staff at a time. This is really is a whistle stop tool. If you have any questions, just pop them in the chat, we'll get to them. I'm just gonna show you what you can do. I'm gonna go back to normal input, and I'm going to extend this caret to all 5 staves by pressing Shift down arrow. And you can see it's across all of them. And I can input whatever I like on all of these staves at the same time. So it could be notes. It could be a note with an accent. Could be notes with staccato. It could be a dynamic. It could be a playing technique. Thank you. It could be anything that's keyboard based you can really do across multiple staves at once, so it makes it a lot quicker. One thing I haven't said is that in Dorico, just like you don't really need to think about ties if you just think about the duration of the note, you don't actually need to think about rests either. So I'm just going to click space until the caret's at the position that I want. Switch to semiquavers. Whoop. And you can see Dorico's putting in rests of the appropriate duration in between as required and beaming over the rests as is necessary for the time signature. Now, if you decide that you don't like how Dorico is beaming things, you don't have to fiddle about with them individually. You can use global notation options for that. And this is sort of where Dorico has a sort of top-down approach. I like to think about it like pastry that you roll out and then you put cookie cutters on it to determine how it's broken up. Your music is the pastry, and time signatures and notation options are the cookie cutters. And you can add different shapes without necessarily changing the pastry underneath. Well, you cut the pastry. That's not a great analogy. Anyway, as an example, here, where the quavers are beamed in 2/4, they're beamed in 4s. But if you don't want that, you can open up notation options, which is Command-Shift-N. And I love these options because they have pictures. that show you what it does. And if we go to beam grouping, I say eighth notes and quarter note denominator time signatures, break beam boundaries, click apply, then close, and they're already automatically split. And so that's a quick way of controlling how you want your music to be grouped from a high level. A particularly sort of contemporary notation one, if I just input a bunch of quavers here for you at the end, is how do you group your notes in 5/8? If I input a 5/8 time signature, you can see that by default it's grouping them in 3, then 2. But if you want to group in 2, then 3, you can specify this in the meters popover using square brackets. So if I put 2 plus 3 within square brackets over 8, my 5/8's grouped in 2 and 3. Same applies for 7/8. If I want 2 plus 3 plus 2, I can get 2 plus 3 plus 2. You can do all sorts of crazy denominations, and it will therefore apply to all the staves that are controlled by that time signature. So no more breaking beams all the way down. You can control it using the time signature. It's a really nice overview way of controlling what it looks like. To finish, because that was a very, very, well, actually no, because Anselm did mention cross-staff notation. There, no, piano. Just show very quickly how you do that in Dorico. I've got a grand staff instrument that has 2 staves. I'm gonna do an arpeggio. And I would like these ones to be on the top staff. So select them and press N. And they jump and appear. They still exist on the bottom staff, but they appear on the top staff with beams as appropriate. So very quick, there we go, cross staff beaming. As a last little thing, I just wanted to show you 2 real world examples in Dorico. One that uses hidden time signatures to control beaming and note grouping, and another one that just shows some divisi, which is nifty. So here is, this is the score to the soundtrack to the film The Piano, which we did live in concert a couple of years ago now. Anyone who's familiar with the score knows that there's a little bit of metric shifting between whether it feels like it's in 3/4 or whether it feels like it's in 6/8. And here, a number of instruments are doing different things at the same time. So I used hidden time signatures for various sections to control how a player's notes were being grouped on a staff basis. So these are individual time signatures. So you can see that the violin one switches from 3/4 to 6/8 feel. And because quite a few players had the same pattern, once these exist, you can then select them and alt-click them, if it has to think about it, and apply them to other staves. So everyone follows the same patterns. It's quite a quick way of controlling that. But it also means that if I change my mind, or if someone says, actually, can you have them all grouped the same? You can just delete them. And the notes go back to their original grouping. So that's hidden time signatures and the power of them. And the other example is, this is a little choral piece that I wrote last year. It's quite chunky. And the great thing about choral pieces is that singers often divide into multiple parts. So I used Dorico's divide feature to control this. So towards the start, I've got my sopranos in 3 parts. That's a single player, single soprano singer, and I've used divisi to split them out. And what that does is it allows me to show, well, it allows Dorico to show choral divide arrows automatically. So that automatically happens when a player goes to divisi or back to unison at a system break. So this is where the altos went from 1 staff to 2 staves on the next system. And if you scroll along, we'll see some where they go back together. So here the tenors and basses divide out onto 2 staves up here. And then here the basses come back down to 1. And here the basses come back down to 1 again. And here's a fun one. Sopranos coming together, tenors coming together, but basses going apart. And so that's automatic. If I were to delete this, the arrows disappear. They're automatically shown. Very, very quick whistle stop tour. There's more, there's all sorts of stuff. But I hope that sort of demonstrates some of Dorico's flexibility with, particularly with note input and how things are fixed at rhythmic positions and how you can change meters and stuff sort of at a top level down. That just makes it a little bit more easy to control.
Lillie, thank you so much for an amazing whistle-stop tour with your magic carrot. It may not be spelled C-A-R-R-O-T, but it certainly is magical. And if you could now take your screen away so that we can see everybody, and also so that everybody unmutes yourselves, please. We had one question. I think George Owen is still on the call, but he put in a question basically that he's been composing a piece in simultaneous multiple tempos, and he's changed the notation on it a number of times, but he's wondering if there's a great way of sorting it out in Sibelius, and also if it's easier in Dorico. So he sent in a few shots very, very helpfully. George, I don't know where you are. And I know that, hi George, and I know that both, I think Lillie and maybe also Anselm would like to respond to that. And then after that, it's free for all. Please feel free to ask any questions you want. So I don't know whether Lillie or Anselm wants to go first.
I don't mind. Do you want to go, Anselm?
Okay, no, you go ahead, Lillie.
Yeah, you go first, Lillie, because I think my answer is kind of a no, but we'll see what Lillie says first.
Okie dokie. Well, let me share my screen because I made a little example for this. Share screen. Yes, please, share. Click share. There we go. Can you see this Dorico project?
Maybe a little bit. Yeah.
Let me zoom in. So there's two ways that I can think about tackling this in Dorico, George. I think we know each other. One of them is to use tuplets that you then hide, sort of a bit like I showed in my demo, so it kind of links together. And the other is to remove rests to achieve the same effect. So if we look into these tuplets, you can see I've got the signposts. If I unhide these, so I looked at the picture that George sent in, and I was sort of counting up roughly where the beats map. So roughly how many displayed beats you want on the top staff in relation to how many exist on the bottom staff. So it's a sort of rough guesstimate that you wanted 12 beats here. So with 4 quavers, 4 quavers, 4 quavers in the space of however many, I think it was 13 or 14, and then ditto working out how many fit around there and then how many fit in here, and then just hiding the tuplets. What I have also got is a hidden open time signature on this top staff. So this is all one big bar for the flute 1, but 4 bars for the flute 2. And so you can see the ratios. Can you see the ratios for these? No, you can't. But yeah, so it's just a matter of working out how many displayed beats you want to fit into the bottom. So with tuplets, you can have any proportion because Dorico treats any note as a fraction. So a whole note is 1 of 1. So therefore the divisions are a lot more easy. So you could have 7 in the space of 19 16th notes. So that's 7:19. So 7 in the space of 19. And the X means the rhythmic division 16th notes. And I can get a tuplet of that division. But you don't have to input 16th notes into the tuplet. It creates a tuplet of that rhythmic space. But if I wanted to, I can actually just put crotchets in there. So obviously that's a bit gibberish and it's gone over the other side of the page. But the principle is in Dorico, you can make a tuplet based on any rhythmic value. You don't have to input that value in the tuplet. So this one, to get it to fit, it's 12 eighth notes in the space of 13 or 14 on the bottom staff, but I input 3 minims into it, just using forced duration to make sure they stick as minims, because if you don't do that, they'll appear as this. So if I stick that back on. So that's one way. As possibly the neater way, because it fills the rhythmic time exactly. The other way is to remove rests in between. So this is quite similar to your example. If I filter for notes and deactivate ends voice, you can see that I've put in the notes roughly where I think you had them, George, with semiquavers or quaver gaps in between, so that they just align wherever they align. And you can do that using a combination of the caret and the rhythmic grid here at the bottom left, which I set to the smallest domination, which is demi semiquavers. So now when I move the caret right or left using the arrow keys, which I didn't show earlier, which you can do, and I can go to the bottom stuff as well, that's moving left and right by demi semiquavers. So I can just move the caret here and say I want to put in a semiquaver there, and it'll put it in exactly where I want it. So that you can do that and then put them. So again, I want to put it there, and I want to put it there, and I want to put it there, and then just once you've done that, select the whole phrase and choose edit, remove rests. And now they're not actually hidden; they don't exist. So those are your two options in Dorico, really.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Lillie. So if you can take the shared screen, yeah. Now we've everybody here. So hopefully that was okay, George.
I can send that to you if you like.
Yes.
Shall I? So my answer is. Oh, sorry. So my answer is slightly different. So firstly, to say that, George, the way you were doing it in Sibelius is probably the best way if you have to tackle something like this. Something else that I tried was this here. Now, this is anytime you want to notate something that's with polytempo notation, it's a mathematical nightmare, and you're going to need to figure out basically everything to figure out what the correct spacing is. So here what I tried to do was I figured out, okay, if each of my systems is 10 seconds long, how many beats am I going to have for each of these tempo? So for crotchet equals 100, I think this is like, what's this? This is 16 2/3 beats, okay? For crotchet equals 72, it'll be that many bars of 3, 4, and so on, like that. Now, the issue with this is that notation software isn't really designed to think of music this way. So even though this is roughly correct, it's not actually accurate in terms of where the notes are in relation to each other. And that's partly because Sibelius doesn't think of a crotchet as being spatially exactly twice as long as a quaver. Notationally, obviously it does, but spatially it's not doing that. And we kind of bump up into a philosophical problem here about the way that we think about Western notation, because notation software and Western notation in general is designed to represent time. But a crotchet doesn't mean anything unless it has a tempo attached to it. So the problem you're kind of bumping into is when Sibelius makes a bar, it doesn't say, right, this duration is 2 seconds, so it should be 3 centimeters wide. Rather, it's just making a crotchet and then accurately trying to space it out in regards to where things are. So your problem is kind of that crotchets here and crotchets here should be longer than one or the other, but Sibelius isn't going to mark them out like that. You might be familiar with, if you're interested in polytempo music, you might be familiar with Stockhausen's Gruppen, which is notated with 3 different tempi. And you can see here kind of the way this was dealt with. Now, an interesting anecdote, apparently the first engraver for this had a nervous breakdown, and Stockhausen had to handwrite the score himself and figure out all the spaces mathematically. And because he's, because he was Stockhausen, he was crazy enough to do that. So you can see that in some of the spacing here, especially down here where this comes in halfway. I would kind of guess, I'd probably advise you that the composers I know who write polytemporal music, there's a couple of people in the UK. There's a guy called Mark Yates, and there's an Irish composer called Stephen Coyle. And the way they get around it is just they don't do a full score, because a conductor is kind of pointless. If say you've got a string quartet and they're all playing in different tempi, the conductor, there's nothing for the conductor to do unless you were to give a conductor to each individual player. So there's no need for a full score, and rather the players just have individual parts, and that would save you a lot of headaches, okay? Because doing this accurately is going to be a nightmare. Now, if you are totally committed to doing it, there is a way to do it. There's a program called Bach, which is free to download, and it functions with max MSP. And the reason it works is because max MSP is thinking of durations mathematically, and it's using code-based language and programming language. So if you're really committed to like writing notation like this that's completely accurate and using lots and lots of different tempo across maybe an orchestral score or something, then I'd maybe have a look into using max MSP and this Bach program. I can send a link to it, and that way you'll be able to get something like this, for example. You know, now this was done in Finale, and was figured out accurately mathematically, but I mean, it took forever. So, you know, if you're willing to spend the rest of your life kind of figuring that out, go for it. Good on you. Otherwise, I'd maybe try the max MSP option. Software at this point just isn't really designed to kind of think of music in that way, and it's got a couple of problems to get around until it can. When it does, we should be able to do it, and it'll be amazing and it'll be cool. But at this point, I don't think neither Sibelius or Dorico is thinking of music in that precise way. So we have to fake the result we want. Hopefully that answers your question.
Well, Anselm, you made me laugh because you sort of said it's a no, and then you have the most detailed no that has several options of yes in my book. So I'm highly amused by your no. I'm going to coin a phrase now. Is that a no or an Anselm no? So anybody else got any questions? Both Lillie and Anselm, as you will have seen from the presentations, are very creative thinkers when it comes to notation. So they're ready, able and willing to tackle anything you have. So just put up your hand or unmute yourself and speak up. Yeah, Deirdre?
Hi, Lillie, a question for you. I'm thinking of swapping over to Dorico, and I'm sort of in the sort of toe in the water bit in terms of doing that. Is there any kind of step-by-step guide that would get me beyond the sort of, I know that the initial is quite a big learning curve. Is there any sort of step-by-step guide that I can follow to do it really systematically?
There is actually, I've already sent some links to Linda, and one of them is sort of getting beginning guide written by John Barron, who's one of the Dorico team. And so he's got two sort of written out tutorials there, one of which is just sort of note input, getting some notes in, I think some chord symbols and a few things like that. And another one is producing like an educational worksheet style, which I think some of the screenshots are slightly out of date because the software is updated since then, but the principles of using, there's all kinds of stuff in Engrave mode that you can do with like using frames to display music in specific parts of the page and combining it with graphics and text. There's also all sorts of great tutorials on the YouTube channel, and particularly one that I think I have sent to Linda, which is a series that's aimed at Dorico SE, which is the free version, but it's sort of a general, here's an introduction to Dorico, which is led by my colleague Anthony Hughes, who voices the videos, but he actually stars in these ones, which is quite nice. So those are really great. But you'll also find there's also some user written stuff. So there's a book that was published, I think earlier this year, called like Getting Started with Dorico 3.5. It was actually published as a little book, and that sounds really great. And there's some other user stuff that you can find online. But yeah, the links from John and to the YouTube channel are probably what I'd recommend. But also in general, things like if you have a relative, well, not too tricky, but however you feel, piece of existing music that you've done, if you just try recreating it in Dorico bit by bit, because that's the sort of stuff that you want to notate, and it's an existing reference that you can try and make similar, and by trying to make it similar, you'll find out things.
Great. And any difference between Mac and PC?
It functions the same on both.
Same. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay.
That's very helpful, Lillie. And also, as Lillie mentioned, she sent some links, and also Anselm will be, and I will circulate them to everybody who registered, along with the slides that both of them have used today. And as well as that, we will be posting this, as we do with all our CPD sessions, on CMC Ireland, our YouTube channel. So, but having said that, we'd love more questions because they're very helpful to people who look back. So any more questions? Great. Yeah, here we go. Angela?
I was wondering, Lillie, with Dorico, like how in Sibelius Anselm was showing all these different symbols combined all together, as well as graphics, whether you can do that in Dorico. I'm particularly interested in, I often like to use these fading bar lines and I insert them as graphics into Sibelius. And I just wondered how something like that would work in Dorico.
Yeah, well, when you say fading bar lines, do you mean they're fading vertically or horizontally?
Horizontally.
Horizontally.
I made them as a a picture, and I've just sort of insert them in Sibelius. But I wasn't sure how to do it with Dorico.
Cool. Well, in Dorico, you've got a couple of options. So the main options for like custom symbols like you have in Sibelius is playing techniques, and now in Dorico 3.5, lines. So in Dorico 3, they started to introduce just sort of generic horizontal lines, which they hadn't had before, because Dorico's approach is very much sort of musical semantic meaning first, and lines obviously can be extremely vague. But now in 3.5, you have custom editors, so you can design line bodies that come made up of multiple repeatable symbols that you can put together yourself, and you can have caps. They can have caps at the start and the end, different ones on systems, text annotation in addition to symbol. Sorry, small Sibelius burn there. And you can design the line styles to be whatever you want. So if you have, I think you can import graphics to use as the line body, so you could do it that way, or you could use the options. You can create solid dashed wedge lines that have a dip in the middle as well. So that's sort of the line style, but for playing techniques as well, you can create custom playing techniques. Well, you can create custom playing techniques, accidentals, clefs, chord symbols. There's a few other things that you can edit. So, and when you open up the editor, it appears as similar to Sibelius on sort of like a graph sheet. And you can pull in glyphs from text fonts. You can pull in just plain text using any font style, and you can put in graphics as well, and you can arrange them in the editor to be however you want, and then save them. So if that's a playing technique, you can then put it in the music and it attaches to rhythmic position. If it's a line, it can spread across a range, and it can attach to note heads, rhythmic positions, bar lines, vertical lines as well. So there's quite a lot more that sort of customizing editing capability now in 3.5.
Great. Thank you very much. I didn't know we were going to have sort of battle of the bands or notation face off, but it's we can maybe have this as a pitch.
Competition is great for everyone.
Absolutely. So anybody else got any questions? I know that many of you in your email sort of said that you wanted to make your scores look, let's say, sharper or smarter. So if anybody has any specific questions on that front or any front. I know that one of the links that Lillie has sent me is, I think, a free 30-day trial or something. So if people want to just play around with it, that might be helpful. And as I said, I'll try to get this presentation up on CMC's YouTube channel as soon as possible. Yes, Deirdre?
Lillie, how much is it? Is it a license thing or is it a one-off?
Yes, it's a one-off license. I think a full straight pro license is about £500. There's a cross-grade if you have a copy of Sibelius or Finale, which is half price. If you're currently in education, I think possibly as a teacher as well, I'm not entirely sure what the educational restrictions are. There's a further discount on that. For anyone interested, I would say get the trial and keep an eye out, because you never know whether there might be a little sale coming up at some point, which I don't know about at all, but I'd say start with the trial.
A little card for Christmas, no?
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Some comments about the kind of making scores cleaner kind of thing. And I guess that's just certainly with Sibelius, don't keep the default settings. When you open the score, change stuff around, because part of the issue is like Sibelius is so prevalent, especially in the education world, that if you just keep the default settings when you open Sibelius, it's going to look like a GCSE composition. And that's not what you want when you put a score down in front of a professional performer. So some of the things that you'll want to be changing are things like the staff size. We talked about how to change fonts and the text styles. Find your own fonts, find something that makes the score look unique to you, and then be consistent about it. And that will really help how your score looks. And then other things like thinking about, well, who's going to be looking at the score and how do I make sure it works for them? So if it's a conductor score, do you need to use large time signatures? Make sure that they appear kind of, if it's a huge A3 orchestral score, make sure they appear down the page so that you've got like 4 of them. So if they suddenly glance at the brass section, they still get a time signature that they can see. The other thing is turn the rulers on in Sibelius. In the, let me just find where it is. Under the View tab in the ribbon, there's an option to turn on staff rulers, object rulers, and selection rulers. If you haven't used any of those before, turn them all on, because then when you move stuff around in Sibelius, you can see how far away it is from a stave. You can also see across like a double spread page where your systems are in relation to the other. Because if you're giving people pages where like one system's up here and the next system's a bit further down and so on, it just looks kind of untidy. So if you have the rulers on, it means you're not eyeballing everything by moving it around. So yeah, some simple things like just making sure it's all, like when you have text, that they're lined up so that they're an equal distance away from the stave if possible. Things like making sure you don't have a system which is made up of a single bar and the next one is 6 bars, because Sibelius has just kind of moved it like that. Make sure your note spacing looks clean. Everything should be legible and readable. Now with contemporary scores, we can't say this many systems per page or this many bars in a single system, because your bars could be really long and then really short, and who knows how many techniques you've kind of got stacked on each other, so that you need to sort of move things around. So think about clarity, and when someone looks at it on the page, is everything legible and readable? And then the only other thing is Sibelius has house styles, which means that you can export all your settings. So all the things that I was talking about, it would be a nightmare if you had to do all those every time you opened a score. You don't want to be doing that. So what you do is under the Appearance tab in the ribbon, over on the left, next to Engraving Rules and Note Spacing Rules, there's a thing called House Style and Export and Import. So what you want to do is export House Style. That will save all your settings. It will save any symbols that you've put in and so on. So export your house style, call it something specific. Say you've set it up for choral scores. So call it choral scores. And then when you open a new project in Sibelius, go to the same tab, click import, select your choral scores layout and import that. And that will have all the layout things that you spent so long kind of figuring out and working out, and so that you don't need to do it all over again. So that should get people started on kind of some layout techniques. But everyone's different, and publishers keep it a very guarded secret, what these kind of things they use, because that's how they make it look really, really nice and effective.
Well, I think Anselm and Lillie have both given, plenty of a run for their money to the publishers, if you like. And I worked very closely with both of them when we were coming up with the formula, because we haven't done a CPD session where it was sort of like presenting two things in harmony and comparing and contrasting. But I certainly believe you've both been very, very passionate in presenting your particular notation systems. And if there are any more questions, we certainly take them. Delighted to. But if not, I would just mention, in addition to thanking both Lillie and Anselm, and as I said, I will send the links and slides and it'll be up on our YouTube channel, just also to mention that our final session in this CPD series, which is run throughout November, is next Thursday, same time, also up on Eventbrite, and it's Developing Audiences by Rob Farhat, who's a specialist in this area, and he's based in London. He's an Irishman, and if you would like to sign up, if you haven't already, we'd love to see you. So thank you all very much, and in particular, obviously, thanks to Anselm and Lillie, and thank you all for joining in.